How do we face the fire? Again, it's one thing to be around the fire, but when you're in the fire, that's a different ball game. How do you get through it? How do you face it? How do you respond to it? And here's the thought. You have to keep walking. You got to keep walking, right? Because here's what happens a lot of times. When we face the fire, we want to stop. And the reason we want to stop is because the furnace is hot. The furnace is frightening. The furnace is hard, and it's difficult. And our first instinct when we find ourselves face to face with the fire is to stop. And we can't do that. The way you make it through is you have to keep walking. Now, how do you do that, though? Because that's easier said than done, isn't it? So how do you keep walking? How do you not stop when you're in the fire? Well, here's the first thing Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, they show us. You just have to stay close to Jesus. Because notice this, when Jesus showed up in the fire, they held on to him. Now, let me give you a little just side note here. In the Old Testament, there were moments in time where Jesus actually shows up in the Old Testament. Scholars call that a Christophany, where Jesus actually shows up. Jacob is one of those. If you remember his life, his story, the Bible says that he wrestled with an angel all night long. Scholars believe that he was wrestling with Jesus. And this is a sermon for another day, but when you wrestle with Jesus, you lose every time. Right? That's just a freebie. But that was a Christophany. And when Nebuchadnezzar says, look, there looks like there's a fourth in the fire and it looks like it's a god, scholars also agree that at this moment in time, Jesus shows up in the fire. And I want you to hold on to that this morning. Because again, when you and I are in the fire, it's a hard place. It's a difficult place. And if we could use an analogy, a lot of times it's like you're walking in the dark. And sometimes it feels like God's a million miles away. And you don't know if he's hearing your prayers. You just don't necessarily feel like he's right beside you. And that can get kind of scary, and it can be a little bit discouraging. But here's what I want you to know. If you keep walking, Jesus will show up. And when he does, church, you have to hold on to him. You have to hold on to him. You can't let go. You have to keep walking because he'll walk through the fire with you. He'll lead you through the fire, but you have to stay close to him, and you can't stop. And that's what I really appreciate about Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. They're thrown into the fire, and they kept walking. And not just literally, but they also did this figuratively. Think about it. Long before they are ever thrown into the fire, the king says, you can bow. I'll give you another chance. You can bow. And if you do, I'll spare your life. And you can read this on your own, but basically their response to the king is this: we're not serving Jesus because it's easy. We're serving Jesus because he's worth it. And there's no problem, there's no trial, there's no test, there's nothing that we're going to face, not even this furnace, that is going to convince us to walk away from Jesus. King, if we live with Jesus. If we die with Jesus. But you need to know, King, either way, we win. Either way, we're going through to the other side. And we believe that we're coming out of this on the other side whole, complete, and tested, and more deeper in our faith, but we're going through this. And we're going to keep walking. And I love what this guy says, Jeffrey Holland, he says this. Listen to these words. He says, don't quit. Don't you quit. You keep walking. You keep trying. There's help and happiness ahead. Some blessings come soon, some come late, some don't come until heaven. But for those who embrace the gospel of Jesus Christ, they come. It will be all right in the end. Trust God and believe in good things to come. How do you face the fire? You have to keep walking.